Welcome to the Sleepy G Show. I'm your host, your most. My name is Gomez, and tonight, like any night here at the Sleepy G Show, we have an amazing special guest. I would like to bring in Scott Moyer. He's a recording artist, a teacher, a writer, and he does so much more. So let's bring in Scott. How are you tonight, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to connect with you finally.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's been a while, and we've been going back and forth for a little bit. And welcome to the show tonight. And
Thank you.
we're looking forward to hearing about your music is the key thing first. I want to know who were your musical influences growing up?
Oh, wow. Well, since I've been grown up a long time ago, the basic influences started when I was about the age of your kids,
Okay.
4 and 8 years old, right?
Hmm.
In Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
And I was growing up during the time that they had the Dick Clark show.
Hmm.
So they had people like, Chuck Berry, you know, and Bo Diddley and Little Richard and all these, rock and roll, like
Oh
the
yeah.
founders of rock and roll, the fathers of rock and roll, the architect of rock and roll. But they also had Elvis, that was out, and I bought his first album.
Hmm.
And so these were my first. Aside from that, my father was in the he was in the Wilmington Symphony Orchestra
Okay.
playing violin. And so at about 4 or 5 years old, I would go and see his concerts where they were playing like Bach or Beethoven or Mahler
Hmm.
and doing these amazing orchestral, concerts. And he would be playing first violin with the orchestra.
Wow.
Uh, but he was working with DuPont as a chemist, with DuPont also in Wilmington, Delaware.
Hmm.
So my musical influences just started, when we had it, televisions had just come out, back in the day. Everybody had a black and white, and then they got a color TV. You know, this is back in the 50s, right?
Right.
So, I just started listening to like Paul Anka. I listened to all the black groups, that
Hmm.
were out on the radio. Carole King was writing, her songs, and and the guys that wrote for Elvis Presley were already writing all their songs. I didn't know anything about songwriting. All I knew was that there was some really cool stuff going on, and there were some cool grooves.
Hmm.
There were some. Now I'm a drummer for 60 years,
Oh
so
wow.
I play guitar, drums, keyboards, and music. I teach music theory, and I play bass. I'm not a big slap bass player, but I play like a Paul McCartney style bass
Okay.
and melodic bass or whatever. I just simply groove along with songs if I'm going to record bass. But I also do vocals on my own songs, and help other people with their songs as a producer. But I was listening to all those people back there. It was like the first one was, like I said, mentioned Elvis
Hmm.
and his first album, and I fell in love with like ballads, that he wrote. He wrote a song called "Old Shep" about his dog. And
Oh wow.
you have to really know that first album to know that the last cut on the second side
Hmm.
was about his dog, Old Shep. And it was
Okay.
it was a big ballad, and I was like really touched. I remember being really touched by that, as well as the melodies that Paul Anka wrote.
Hmm.
Like the "You Are My Destiny." All those big "You Are My Destiny," and all those kinds of things. And now it turns out that I have a friend that plays with Pablo Cruz, Corey Lirios, who lives at the Sherwood Country Club right across the street from Paul Anka, and they're best friends.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he's the guy who wrote all the hits for Corey Lirios is the guy that wrote all the hits for Pablo Cruz.
Oh wow. No. Oh,
One of
no,
my
I'm sorry. No, no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
apologize.
Well, I'm just saying, it's funny how we're 1 degree of separation. It's not like 7 degrees of separation.
Hmm.
I know Paul Anka's violinist. She's a female violinist, and I've jammed with her at private parties in Hollywood, and she's always on Facebook, talking about where she is and on the planet Earth gigging with Paul Anka.
Hmm. Oh
You know,
wow.
so I have a lot of friends that are in the music business, and so my early influences started with that, and all I was digging the grooves of everybody, especially Little Richard,
Okay.
who has a drummer named Earl Palmer, and
Okay.
and Earl Palmer, all those hits back then. You may be too young to know all those hits, but um, Little Richard came out with all these hits that changed the world.
Hmm.
He was basically the the architect of rock and roll.
Okay.
That's what he calls himself. And I met Little Richard at an all night, eatery in Hollywood one night,
Hmm.
about one o'clock in the morning after coming home from a gig, and Little Richard was in the same Mexican restaurant grabbing some food, all dressed up in leather frills and stuff like that.
Everything you could think of.
Yeah, my life has just been really fascinating in terms of like how many people I have met in Hollywood and also on the East Coast
Hmm.
in the music business. It just goes on forever, right? So I was digging the groove, and my brother started. He wanted to learn drums, so my dad got him a Ludwig drum, a snare drum,
Okay.
and my brother. I had my eye on that snare drum for some reason as a like an 8 year old,
Right.
right? A 7 or an 8 year old. I had my eye on it. And my brother was, he didn't practice that much, so he gave it up. And then I eventually got the snare drum. And
Hmm.
then when I turned 11 years old and had moved to Ridgewood, New Jersey from Wilmington, Delaware, uh, I started taking drum lessons
Oh wow.
from a guy over in a place called Hohokus. You
Oh
probably
wow. Okay. I know exactly where Hohoke is up
you know where
17 North.
Yeah, you know where Hohokus is, right?
Yep.
So I would go down to this guy, Mr. Richards. I would go down to his basement every week and take a half-hour drum lesson, and learn how to play rudiments. I still have my sticks and my drum pad right next to me right here.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I teach online right now, but I've been teaching drums for 50 years and teaching many of the rudiments that I learned from Mr. Richards and other teachers. But but I took up the drums where my brother just gave up on them
Right.
and ended up playing. I was never in a band, but the thing that stimulated me was the fact that I heard Earl Palmer playing that really cool groove.
Okay.
And you had asked me what are my early influences, and I can get really specific now when I look back on it because because of the sound of the groove.
Okay.
And years later in North Hollywood, I met Earl Palmer,
Oh wow.
and I started creating a symbol called the Legends of the Groove.
Okay.
I have a signature symbol with 140 signatures on it
Oh wow.
of the world's greatest recording drummers. And if I didn't have Earl Palmer on there, it wouldn't really mean as much as it really does to me.
Right.
But I'm almost finished getting all the signatures that I need on that. But it's become a really historic archive curated
Symbol.
symbol, and I have it in a closet in my bedroom.
Hmm.
And it's got Earl Palmer on there. It's got even the drummer from a group called Traffic,
Wow.
Jim Capaldi.
Okay.
It's got Jim Keltner on there, who's one of Ringo's best
Best
friends.
friends.
Jim Keltner played on tons, and he played with Mad Dogs and the Englishmen, and he played, Joe Cocker, and he played on, so many big hits. Jim Keltner's on there as well as Steve Smith and Vinnie Colaiuto and Carmine Appice, who played with Vanilla Fudge. I mean, the list goes on. Bernard Purdy,
Hmm.
Elvin Jones from the jazz world, Jack DeJohnette. I have so many drummers that are really historic drummers, and that's what makes the symbol so powerful in its scope because it has 100 years of documented music history
Wow.
on the symbol. With Louis Bellson, very
Yeah.
famous jazz drummer, Louis Bellson's on there. I had dinner with Louis one time and asked him to put his signature on the symbol. Very happily, he did with a great Louis Bellson smile. And 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 basically I've got a bunch of those old jazz drummers, and
Hmm.
then I have all the really amazing jazz drummers that I could get on the West Coast when they were out here. If they were playing in clubs out here, I would go and travel all the way to where they're playing and put their signature on the cymbal, you
Wow.
know. And this was the reason I did this was simply to document drummers and drummers of many, many different styles and many, many musical genres,
Hmm.
so that my drum students would know who to listen to.
Right.
That was the only reason I did it, was so that I could document and show my drum students
Hmm.
while I'm teaching them who they need to listen to if they want to play certain styles,
Right.
if they want to kind of develop their own style.
I mean, and that's the thing, like everyone has their own style, like you said, because I mean, I'm not a drummer by means of musicianship. I mean, growing up, I played a saxophone, you know what I mean? Um, so for me, it's like when you see people doing the drums or playing any musical instrument, I'm going to be honest with you, any musical instrument you can play, it's an amazing thing. I mean, I grew up playing saxophone and clarinet. I
Oh,
went from
yeah,
the
right,
big
right.
heavy box to the small little box to carry because it was too heavy to carry.
Yeah, and back then when we were kids, we didn't know squat
Yeah,
about music theory.
no, that's true.
We didn't know anything about music theory, and now I'm teaching courses at a local college just a mile down the street, a place called Channel Islands University.
Hmm.
I'm starting a course there in music theory in January.
Oh, nice. Congratulations on that, sir.
Yeah, well, it just started. It's just an extension course, but it's going to be it's in a beautiful library and it's a beautiful classroom.
Hmm.
Got an enormous amount of desks and seats in it, and it's got big screens. It's got two huge screens that I can put a PowerPoint,
Yeah.
presentation up on the boards, and it's got a whiteboard and a microphone, stuff like that. So 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 that's going to be kind of interesting to see if how many people show up, you
Right.
who want to learn music theory. But every day, like I taught a lesson earlier today to a young lady in Pennsylvania, a little 17-year-old,
Hmm.
and I taught her. I've been teaching her like Hotel California
Okay.
and some Van Morrison songs, like Brown Eyed Girl and
Nice.
stuff like that. And she loves like those songs with rhythm. She's got an
Yeah.
acoustic guitar, and she loves all those songs. I'm trying to get her to learn how to play better rhythm. So we're doing a lot of Jackson Brown songs and
Hmm.
Eagles songs and stuff with really good rhythm. And we also were learning the song "Help,"
I'll
but
remember that song.
by the Beatles. Yeah, by
Yep.
John Lennon wrote that one. But
Yes,
it's
sir.
all got really great rhythm to it.
Right. It does.
Like this kind of a thing. Where we're just going like. When I was younger, so much younger than today. You know.
But still, it's amazing. Like, for me, I always wanted to play guitar, you know what I mean? But unfortunately, I was one of those guys that I could never pick it up because for some reason I was either my hand coordination to a fingers, it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
So I was it's always fascinating. And like I said, the drums, I mean, I've known a couple of friends of mine are good drummers. Probably, in my case, probably the best besides, guys who, like you said, drummers that from now, like a Phil Collins. You see Phil Collins bang on those drums like he used to back in the day.
Right.
Now he just sings it. But I mean, it's an amazing thing when you could be a multi-talented artist like someone like that, sing, play guitar, um, play the drums, you know what I mean? And
Right.
it's one of those things. Even like Billy Joel, he plays the piano, but he plays guitar too. So to see that is an amazing thing because I feel like it's a lost art a little bit when you're playing those kind of good songs from back in the day. And I hate to say the word back in the day, but at that time and era. I mean, the music now is good, but is not as, how can I say, harmonized. Like you said, it's more like some of the music's too angry, some of this is that, some of it's protesting. So where's the fun and the joy of the music sometimes? You know what I mean? Like you sometimes I miss that old stuff. Like I do listen back to old songs from during the different times of the era because I miss some of those good old songs, like you said. Some of the
Well, yeah.
Beatles.
Well, no. I mean, I listen to those things all the time. I teach those songs.
Mhm.
Like I don't. Are we on live on camera? Are
No, no,
we?
no, 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 no. This is pre-recorded.
Okay. Well, I mean, I teach those songs. So I mean, to my just behind me, I
Hmm.
have stacks and stacks and stacks of songs, right?
Right.
Because I've compiled like a bunch of tunes that I teach over
Hmm.
many, many, many years on, and now I teach on Zoom because of the pandemic.
Right.
I was teaching privately at people's homes and people would come to my place or whatever, but I was teaching for like 40 years like that. But then when the pandemic happened, I stopped and just started teaching on Zoom. But I've accumulated and compiled like tons of songs. I've
Hmm.
got all the Beatles albums,
Oh, wow.
in like separate stacks of lyrics.
Right. And you have
And
it
I,
all.
and I know pretty much all the Beatles songs by heart,
That's
like.
still, I mean, that's still an amazing thing, though.
Yeah. So now getting back to that whole like you said, well, what are your early influences?
Mhm.
Well, I just sort of like I was a jock growing up.
Okay. So
Okay.
was I.
Yeah, we're jocks, we're guys, we're doing that guy thing. And it
Hmm.
was before the Beatles.
Yes.
It was when, Chuck Berry, the father of rock and roll, you're familiar with Chuck Berry, right?
Yes, I am. Yes, of course. Legendary
Yeah.
guitarist and singer.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that, you know, I mean, I was digging him. He would do that little duck walk on the Dick
Hmm.
Clark show, and it was called the Dick Clark show back then. It wasn't American Bandstand until later on.
Right.
And so I would watch everybody dance, and my sister and I would copy all the dances, by watching the TV, from our little room in our home in Wilmington, Delaware,
Hmm.
little place called Deerhurst. It was like a little community called Deerhurst in outside of Wilmington, Delaware. And so we didn't really, I didn't really. All I did was buy a few records,
Right.
and then I was kind of interested in that, but I was mostly going down to the playing field, the baseball field, good old place called Ward Park in
Hmm.
Wilmington, in Deerhurst, and we would play baseball, right? And we had athletic skills. We didn't know how good we were because we were only like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old,
Right.
right? We didn't know how good, but we knew we liked baseball like
Mhm.
everybody else when they're a young kid. And we played, touch football. We learned how to do this and that. And my dad played basketball at Duke University.
Mhm.
Uh, he was on the first basketball team to ever play at Cameron Stadium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I was around sports all the time. And then when I moved to New Jersey, I took up tennis, and beat the number one guy at the club. Right,
Oh, nice.
I took tennis lessons in fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and was playing like all the time, and playing touch football and baseball, Babe Ruth League, and music was just a sidecar thing. You know, I bought like Dwayne Eddy. Dwayne
Hmm.
Eddy, he's a famous instrumental guitar
Guitars.
player. I bought his album, and I had bought the Everly Brothers album. So here it is. I bought all these albums with, like Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Elvis, and then the Everly Brothers with all their vocal harmonies, which became the same harmonies that the Beatles used,
Right.
right? And I love the Everly Brothers stuff. And years later, I'm jamming with Albert Lee, who played with the Everly Brothers for 25 years.
Oh, wow. That's so awesome.
Yeah, I've been going to private parties, for the last 15 years up in Bell Canyon, and Albert Lee is always there.
And that's amazing. So you get to bump into him and play with him once in a while.
Bump in, he sets up right next to my bass drum, and if I'm playing drums with him, and I played bass with him, I played guitar with him.
Yeah.
He came to my 65th birthday.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Uh, yeah, he and his wife flew in from England, and
Oh,
they hustled over to this restaurant, and I had invited them to my 65th birthday with many of my other music friends, and they showed up, and I said, "Wow, this is wonderful," So yeah, I mean, I dug the Everly Brothers. I dug, all these other groups and whatnot. And then in college, I end up getting chosen with my band
Right.
uh, to play in a concert backing up Chuck Berry.
Oh, wow. That
So
had
I
to
got
be amazing.
so in 1971
Right.
on May 1st, I played in this place called it was a festival that the University of North Carolina had put on for many, many years before
Hmm.
that. Started in the 60s. It was called Jubilee.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and it was and Chuck Berry was hired. He was hired to come in and play for an hour, and my band was hired to back him up.
Hmm.
So the unique thing about this is that my brother was there, and he was taking pictures of me while I was talking to Chuck before the gig, and during the gig and on stage in front of 23,000 people.
Right.
He took pictures of the whole gig.
Wow.
And the Allman Brothers were backstage tooting up they had a huge bag of cocaine backstage, and the Allman Brothers were tooting up. When I went back to visit them backstage, they offered me some coke, but I turned it down because I said, well, I wouldn't want to do any of that if I'm going to go on stage with Chuck Berry.
Right.
They had a different reason. I mean, they almost lived and breathed on cocaine. Literally.
But
Uh,
that's a good story to say to everybody, you know what I mean?
yeah, and so what happens is that they also filmed that gig that I did with Chuck Berry. So it's on YouTube
Oh, wow.
under UNC 71 Jubilee, right? And you can go on there. There's two segments. There are two like black segments. There's a
Right.
segment one, segment number two. If you click on segment number two and go all the way to the end, you'll see the Allman Brothers. You'll see Dwayne Allman playing this great slide solo, and then all of a sudden it cuts to Chuck Berry, and there I am playing drums with him.
But that's
On
so
my,
awesome to see, to even see that on YouTube too, you know what I mean?
and
That's
I
like an amazing thing.
Yeah, and I found out about this 40 years later because the guy who was the cameraman was a
Right.
fan was a fan of mine back in college. He used to like follow me around and watch these gigs I played on drums.
Oh, wow.
And he basically contacted me 40 years later and sent me a CD of the live gig.
That's so awesome.
And then it ended up on Facebook and
Wow.
on YouTube, sorry.
No, that's
But
all right.
it's really a trip. So here I go from like 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, watching Chuck Berry, 1956.
Right.
Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley. That's when everything exploded. Little Richard, Earl Palmer, all these people, all these amazing drummers that were playing, and all these amazing artists were playing, and here I am, playing with Chuck Berry, and then meeting Earl Palmer. You know,
Yeah, and you're like I would have been starstruck myself, and I can only imagine how you were when you met him.
I'm basically just take it with a grain of salt, because
Hmm.
by the time I had met and played with Chuck Berry, I'd been playing drums since 1962.
Okay.
And I joined a band in Hong Kong. I moved. My parents got transferred. Our family got transferred to Hong Kong
Oh,
in
wow.
1962. So I didn't get to go to high school with all my buddies in Ridgewood, New Jersey. I
Hmm.
went up to eighth grade with them, and had all these great friends in New Jersey, and then I ended up getting transferred across the world, to Hong Kong, and went to a British high school.
Wow.
And then somebody found out that I played drums, or I didn't really play drums. I never really had played drum set. I just knew rudiments.
Hmm.
And some other drummer was in a band called the Beachcombers, and they asked me if I could replace him because he was going on leave during the
Right.
summertime, and they wanted to get rid of him anyway.
So it just works out.
So I got the gig, and I rented a drum set, and I started getting back into my rudiments. So here's an interesting fact. When the Beatles came out with their first album,
Hmm.
it was released in England
Okay.
in in March 22nd, 1963.
Wow.
I was in Hong Kong. I had already joined the band in April.
Right.
We got a hold of the only Beatle album in Hong Kong, which is a British crown colony at the
Mhm.
time. We got a hold of that. Somebody went to England and came back with that because Beatlemania had not even really started, but it was beginning a
It
little
was
bit.
in the beginning. Right. Right.
So we got a hold of this album, the British version, the Parlophone version of the album,
Hmm.
and we learned the entire Beatle album. Please, Please Me.
Yes.
It was called Please, Please Me back then on Parlophone. Uh, I had a couple of the guys were with the U.S. consulate. Their dads were with the U.S. consulate, so they had these beautiful homes that we were able to practice at up in the mountains
Oh,
and the
wow.
hills in the mountains of Hong Kong. And I would go over to these incredibly lavish homes with these beautiful stereo systems, and we would set up all the music in the living room and practice the Beatles songs.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up being one of the only bands probably in the world that was doing the entire Beatle record from side to side, from the front to the back.
Almost like a tribute.
Yeah,
I got
and I
a
was
tribute cover band.
well, we did a whole bunch of we did all British art. We did the
Okay.
Shadows instrumental group that backed up Cliff Richard. Well, we did some Cliff Richard. We did the Shadows. We did bits and pieces by Dave
Hmm.
Clark Five. We did a whole bunch of stuff and a few American songs and whatnot. But we did instrumental and vocal stuff. And we actually, I don't know if you're familiar with many people in the jazz world, but at one point this band got so good. We got so many write-ups. I have all these like write-ups of the band that in the newspapers
Right.
because we had a bunch of vocals and we were doing all this amazing music. And I was like 15
Wow.
at the time, So and this is 1963
Hmm.
before the Beatles came.
Before they came out.
February 9th on the Ed 1964 on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Wow.
February 9th, 1964. We were already, for 8 months, we were already doing all the Beatles stuff. And
Right.
already,
Right.
already knew, and I had seen the Beatles live. They came to Hong Kong actually in 1964,
Hmm.
and I saw the Beatles live at a small movie theater called the Princess Theater.
Right.
Sat in the front row.
Had to be an amazing thing to see.
Are you kidding? I mean, wow. We're talking about, you're looking at these three amazingly charismatic guys, singing on one microphone, singing This Boy,
Right.
little ballad, singing This Boy. And then they're doing Long Tall Sally and they're doing Twist and Shout. They're doing like, Ticket to Ride and I Want to Hold Your Hand. I mean, there's one hit after the other, hit after the other, after the other, after the other. And I'm just sitting there like a private concert in the first row, dead center.
Hmm. And
You know,
that's awesome.
you know. So you talk about my early influences.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you had a lot of influences, which is amazing because it's a great mixture. And
Yeah,
you really
yeah,
don't hear it. People say, oh, it's usually like two or three bands, but you actually had a huge amount of influences on where you are today. And
absolutely. Yeah,
and that's a great thing because when I talk to people, oh yeah, this is, they'll mention two or three bands or two or three hip hop artists or two or three country singers, and those were the influences. But you were exposed to so much, including when you're thinking about the dates, when you go back to 1950s and the 60s and the 70s, you went through three, almost three different generations right there.
yeah.
From you went from Elvis to Chuck Berry to the Beatles right there almost, and to Phil Collins and to everybody else.
Everybody in between.
Yeah,
Chicago, Led Zeppelin.
yeah,
I mean, I went to Led Zeppelin concerts. I went to Mountain concerts. I went to Blind Faith in the Spectrum in Philadelphia. It's like I got so many stories. It's mind-boggling. Here I go to see Chicago playing in 1970 in Greensboro, North Carolina, because I went to the University of North Carolina,
mhm,
and Greensboro is 45 minutes away. So I'm watching Danny Serafine playing the drums, and I'm knocked out. And I picked up a lot of his style because he had really had an aggressive drum style,
mhm,
and he he really incorporated his tom toms as musical hooks, like
Right.
Ringo did, as musical hooks into the music that they were doing. And they were doing like some really aggressive, like songs like 25 to 6 to 4 and Make Me
Hmm.
Smile and all these like they had a song that was, I forget the name, it was like a da 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 dun dun da 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 dun 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 da da da. That's the way it started out. And I was in bands back then. I was in about 4 different bands at the University of North Carolina each year that I
Right.
was there. And each year, the bands would play a whole different variety of stuff, from Hendrix to the Cream to Chicago to Santana.
It's almost
Another,
anything you could think of.
yeah, and it turns out years later, I played a round of golf with Danny Serafine.
Wow.
Yeah, I met Danny Serafine through the guy that owns the company called DW Drums out here, John Don Lombardi.
Hmm.
I was at a wine bistro in a place called Westlake, California, and I was living in that area, and I was sitting at I was check this. This is before I even started, the symbol.
Hmm.
I think I don't recall exactly. Uh, yeah, it was no. Actually, this is after I started. I started the symbol in 1999.
Hmm.
I started getting the signatures on the symbol in 1999, but I played golf with Danny sometime around between 2002 and 2005
Wow.
because I was at this wine bistro and and uh, and Danny walked in with Don Lombardi, and I was sitting having a glass of wine with John Robinson, who's
Hmm.
who's real who's David Foster's a composer. He's a famous composer and a songwriter. He wrote songs for Earth, Wind and Fire and
Okay.
Celine Dion and all these other people. He's a very famous composer. Well, his drummer is John Robinson.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm sitting having a glass of wine with John Robinson and his wife, and in walks Danny Serafine and Don Lombardi, right? And I'm going like, oh my God, there's Danny friggin' Serafine. A couple of weeks later, I'm at the golf course. I was really into golf during that time. For
Hmm.
about 10 years, I took up golf and was playing like 3, 4 days a week,
Give anything to
without,
play once a week.
oh yeah, no, I got my scores knocked down from the 90s down. I actually hit a 69 one day,
Oh,
you
wow.
know. So I don't do things half-ass.
No,
Uh,
no.
I don't do things half-ass. If I want to, if I take up a sport, I want to become number one.
Right. I get you. No,
Okay.
I totally respect that.
If I'm playing football, I'm doing quarterback or I'm going out and receiving passes in the end zone.
Hmm.
Yo, throw it to me. Hey, I'm open.
Yeah, no, I got you. I mean, I was a lineman, so I was pushing people for a living.
Yeah,
I could tell you that much. So I always had fun doing that because it was the fun of pushing people around.
yeah,
So I always enjoyed that as a kid.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So here it is. Here I am meeting Danny Serafine, and 2 weeks later, I'm at the golf course shooting, just hitting, practice golf balls on the range, and I'm ready to go home, and Danny drives in park. He parks in the parking lot on the upper level, and I see him, and he sees me, and he goes, "Hey, man, you want to do a round of golf?" And I go, "Yeah, okay." I wasn't gonna do it, but I put all my golf clubs in this cart, and here it is. I'm driving around with one of heroes,
Right.
uh, who I've studied his drumming inside out. You
That's
know,
still that's awesome. You played around a golf with one of your heroes still. That's
and
like insane.
and the funny thing was that I parred the front nine,
Nice.
and he was pissed.
I can only imagine. I mean,
He
you were
was
playing golf
pissed.
3 or 4 times a week. I give anything to play once a month.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was really into improving my scores, right?
Mm,
But like Danny hit from the white tees, I hit from the blue tees.
okay.
He was hitting from the women's tees, and I'm hitting from the blue tees, and he goes, "Wow, you're hitting from the blue tees?" I said, and so that he made himself hit from the blue tees, and that I thought that was funny. I didn't say anything. I just knew that he was frustrated because he had to hit longer shots from the blue tees,
Right. I
right?
playing golf now. The blue tees are like the pros, the white tees are novice and intermediates, and the red tees are the ladies. So I
Yeah.
play from the whites now. So he would have been okay if it was his time.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm still at my age. If I went out, I'd still play from the blue tees. But but here I met Danny, and he became a really good friend because of that golf, that
Right.
one round of golf, right?
And that's amazing.
So every time I go see him play live locally here in California, he always invites me backstage. You know,
That's
it's like
awesome.
I can go hang with all these people that are hanging out.
Yeah.
All these drummers are hanging out, and every one of those drummers are on my cymbal.
Oh my God, that's so cool though.
Yeah, yeah, they're all like Greg Bissonette, who plays drums with Ringo.
Mhm.
He's on the cymbal. You know,
That's one symbol you don't want to lose. I'll tell you that much. That should go into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame right there.
well, it should. I'm actually looking for people to put really sophisticated bids on it.
Yeah.
You know, it's been estimated at a pretty strong value. You know,
Oh, I
uh,
could say
like a
that.
like a seven figure value, but not by me.
No,
It's been
no.
it's been estimated by other professional people
Yes.
who are in the NFT market, or they're in the they're well known to be in uh, the uh, the bidding market,
Right. No, no,
of
I
his
know what you mean by that.
historical products. So you can't just have anybody just throw out. I've turned down 100 grand, 75,000 on it. I said that's a joke. I mean, what am I going to do? Took me 25 years to develop the symbol.
There's more to that symbol than anything.
It's the history of rock and roll
It's
and
your
jazz.
symbol is your symbol. And I
Yeah.
mean to that hopefully one day, if I ever get a chance to go out to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum, I hope I get to see that there because that would
Well,
be a piece of history right there.
oh yeah, no, it's you see, if you go to a museum
Hmm.
and you look at a drum set, or you look at a famous guitar or a bunch of guitars from the Who or Eric Clapton, there's all the Beatles guitars. You're just going to look at it and you're going to go, "Oh wow, that's a guitar."
Right.
But now if you stop to see the symbol, you would be looking at all of the discographies of
Hmm.
all 140 drummers
Yes.
and percussionists. You would look at all of the hits that Steve Gadd played on,
Played.
that Earl Palmer played on,
Right.
that Bernard Purdy, who backed up Aretha Franklin's band,
God.
that was the backup drummer for Aretha Franklin
Right.
with King Curtis and the Kingpins. If you looked at the symbol, you'd be hearing a list and seeing a list of all of the discographies of 140 drummers and percussionists,
Hmm.
from Santana, all the drummers from Santana, all the drummers from Chicago, all the drummers from Steely Dan. Oh, they're all on the symbol,
Hmm.
right? And then and more and more and more, and drummers that weren't, with those particular groups, like jazz drummers like Louis Bellson. So you'd be seeing all these other instruments at a museum, but you would have to stop for hours,
Just
even
as him.
days, to see all of the. And if I had videos of every one of them playing drum solos,
Hmm.
or in playing live with their famous groups that they were with, then you would have that on another screen
Right.
in a museum, where you could access or put headphones on and access the discographies and look at what's happening and hear what's going on with every
Hmm.
one of those drummers' styles.
That would actually be really cool, actually, is to see that.
That monumental.
That would
And
be
I did,
monumental.
I didn't realize that that's what I was creating.
Hmm.
I really didn't realize it. But after all is said and done, I was just doing this for my drum students so that they would know who to listen to. But now, if you want to manifest it on another level,
Hmm.
that's how it would be seen.
Right.
So we're doing an AI version of that symbol right now as we speak,
Oh, wow.
with 10 drummers as a template, as an experimental template to see what we can do with the AI version of the symbol.
That'd be kind of cool to see what happens.
Yeah. So, then I wanted to get back into the Hong Kong, where I was telling you when I was in Hong Kong that my group ended up playing at the Hilton Hotel
Hmm.
in Hong Kong. We were invited to play for a fundraiser for a children's hospital. And on the same bill was a famous jazz composer and keyboard player named Thelonious Monk.
Okay. I've heard of that name before.
Well, everybody in the jazz world, you know, sees Thelonious Monk as one of the greatest composers of all time
Hmm.
and one of the most odd, avant-garde keyboard players because he played with a lot of diminished chords and minor seven flat five chords and put together all these little, edgy sounding melodies.
Hmm.
But he has all these famous songs that he had written. And here we are in our Beatle outfits, standing behind the Thelonious Monk
Right.
trio while they're doing their jazz set. And we came on later to play for these two dancers from New Zealand, and we played "I Saw Her Standing There" and a couple of other Beatles songs, and that's all we were hired to do. But there we were playing with Thelonious Monk.
Wow.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's
I
still
was
just to
15,
see that.
yeah, but I was 15 years old.
Right.
You know, and I've been in LA for since 1976, and everybody talks about Thelonious Monk like he's a god.
I can only imagine, you know what I mean? That's the thing. Like, when you hear those names, you're like, it's still like mind blowing, you know what I mean? Like to hear Felonious Monk, to hear this, and just to hear how many signatures you have on that symbol that means everything, you know what I mean? It's just the one of those greatest things that you'll never, how can I say, you don't get to see as much, you know what I mean? It's like a nice frozen time of history of drummers, and that's something that you take pride in and in your music, but also teaching your students too. It's
Right.
very legit, you know what I mean? That's something I really admire from you because the teaching the students the right way is the cool thing that you're doing and
Yeah.
teaching them.
Well, I'm really dedicated as a teacher. I teach, guitar,
Hmm.
teach like everything from, all the chords, jazz chords, rock songs, jazz songs, doesn't matter. I teach same on piano. I took up the piano at the University of North Carolina when I studied music theory. And then I would go to the piano rooms after my music theory class and work out all the theory on the piano,
Wow.
right? I would learn all the triads.
Hmm.
They would teach you like how a chord is put together with, like a major third and a minor third. You'd
Right.
have to learn what a major third and a minor third is, and then you go like, oh my gosh, there it is. But I found easier ways to learn all the chords than the way I learned in college.
In college, right.
There's the college way of learning, and then there's a shortcut way of learning as well.
Right.
Where I won't get involved in teaching a music lesson here, but anybody can learn like all the chords in the key of C
Right.
in a heartbeat, right?
Hmm.
And nobody taught me that. Nobody knew that when I was growing up in my family, because my father didn't know theory, but he could play in the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra on violin, and he could read.
Right. And he knows how to read the music.
He could read like brilliant and had incredible technique.
Hmm.
And he played at Duke University, and he also played percussion, but he knew nothing about theory. He told me years later. He said, "Scott, I don't know what you're talking about when you talk about all this theory." I said, "Well, I didn't know that. I thought he knew." So not a lot of people know theory, but I've learned kind of the back way. I taught
Hmm.
myself music. I taught myself on guitar. I bought a guitar in Barcelona, Spain in 1964
Wow.
while I was on vacation with my parents. We would every summer we would go back to the United States from Hong Kong,
Hmm.
and then we'd come back to Hong Kong. So I bought an acoustic guitar in Barcelona, and I started teaching myself all the Beatles songs.
Right.
Like "Till There Was You." I would teach myself all of George Harrison's parts, all of Paul McCartney's bass parts,
Hmm.
and all of John Lennon's rhythm guitar parts.
Right.
Right. So I would just teach whenever I had a song that I liked, I would teach myself, I would find the notes, but I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Wow.
You see, when I took theory,
That's when you learned.
everything fell into place. I went back and looked at all the songs that I taught myself, and all the theory all of a sudden, like a big neon light in my brain, everything lit up
Hmm.
and it made sense because it was all in theory. What it means is everything is related, everything is relative.
Right.
Every note, every chord, every movement in every chord, it's related,
Hmm.
and it leads you somewhere, and it leads you here and there and there, and theory tells you why and how it does that.
Wow. I mean, that's a thing, you know what I mean? People don't realize, like you said, music theory is one thing and learning it is another. But, as a teacher, as you teach the students, as you learned on your own, that's an amazing feat. You know, I mean, Scott, and I gotta say, this was actually a real honor to have you on the show tonight
Well,
and
thank you,
listening
man.
to
Appreciate it.
listening because I actually learned a lot more than I expected tonight, actually. You know what I mean? Listening to you and your passion and the passion that you're giving, you're passing that knowledge on to your students. That's one thing I'm like so thrilled for you too. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's an amazing thing. But before we do call it a night, where can people find your music and stuff about you?
Well, I'm a songwriter. You
Mhm.
know, I'm a published songwriter with ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, since 1986, and I have songs on movies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I have produced, film soundtracks.
Okay.
I've played drums and played guitar and sang and wrote original music. If people are interested in seeing any of my movies, you can go to see, you can look up Fantasy, the Surf Network.
Hmm.
I got hired to write 45 minutes of music and play, and I hired a bunch of other musicians to come into the famous record plant, which is a famous recording studio in Los Angeles, and we recorded like 45 minutes of music at the record plant and another studio that we used as well back in 1979,
Oh, wow.
right? For this surf movie that I got hired to write. So, so I have a. If you look up Fantasy, FANTASEA,
Hmm.
the Surf Network, and you go on there, you'll see a picture of a surfer, that's an animated surfer with a surfboard, and then if you scroll down, it'll scroll down to the trailer,
Okay.
and you click on the trailer and go through this animated sequence
Hmm.
up to about minute 3.12, right?
Okay.
3 minutes 12 seconds, and then this song kicks in. That's the trailer for the movie called "Only a Few Survive."
All right.
And I'm playing drums and singing, and I wrote that song back in 1974 in Washington D.C. based on how many people had jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and lived to tell about it. It was an article in the Washington Post
Right.
where I was living in D.C. before I moved to L.A. and I was reading the Washington Post and I saw this article called "Only a Few Survive," and I said, "Wow, there's a great hook." So I wrote on the guitar. I wrote the chorus to "Only for a Few Survive." Years later, when I got the gig doing the surf movie, I wrote the lyrics
Right. And that's awesome.
and then went in the studio and recorded it on in one take.
Hmm.
What you hear, and you're going to see some beautiful surf footage.
Okay. I definitely
It's
want to check it out tonight when we're
it's
done.
all cut to the incredible surf footage. But I'm singing and also playing drums, and we did that track with a great B3 Hammond organ and guitar and bass
Hmm.
player, and everybody knew their parts. Boom, we got it done in one take.
Nice.
So now, yeah, my stuff is on there, but I also have tons of tons. I have CDs. People would have to contact me if they were interested in hearing my material, because I don't put my material out there. I have an album that came out in 2007 where I wrote the title track to the album.
Hmm.
It's from a group in Europe called Code,
Okay.
CODE,
Yes.
and the title of the title song, which I wrote with a couple of other collaborators,
Hmm.
is called "The Enemy Within,"
Okay.
and that's a killer song. That's like Toto meets a Survivor,
Hmm.
meets all these '80s melodic bands, right? It was a revival of '80s melodic music,
Hmm.
and the guy who sang it was Sherwood Ball, the son of Ernie Ball, who makes all the guitar amplifiers and Music Man amplifiers, basses, and guitars. And Sherwood has this killer voice. He actually turned down the vocal gig with Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he was my best friend, and we wrote this song. He pulled me in on this project he was doing with the band Code, which were out of Sweden, and it's just magnificent album.
Hmm.
If anybody wants to hear some killer stuff, that whole album is just magnificent.
I'll definitely post it up for you.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
yeah. I'm saying I could go on. If your time is limited, I
Yeah,
could
it
go on,
is.
but I've got years and years of all this stuff that's accumulated. So I'm writing songs every day.
You know what? We are going to invite you back to talk more about this because I think we could do a part two with you easily to
Oh,
learn
no,
more
yeah,
about. So we're definitely going to invite you back, Scott, on this
yeah,
because I think it would be great. You know what I mean? So what I'll do is, we're definitely going to set up another time to get you back in the new year, and
already.
we're going to visit and we're going to talk a little bit more about that and go more into depth because I think my listeners are going to love to hear more about this too.
Well, I can play the music on the radio if you want. I can get them up on my computer and click them on if you're able to hear them, or I could send them to you.
Yeah,
You
we
know,
could, we're gonna do something on the next episode because so people could hear it and we'll talk about it too.
yeah,
So we're looking forward to that.
yeah. Oh, well, always it's fun talking about the stuff, and it's fun meeting new people like yourself. I very
Yeah,
much appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, yeah.
no, but I thank you very much for coming, Scott. Thank you so much.
You bet.
I appreciate it, and your students are lucky to have you as a teacher to learn a lot from you because I learned a lot tonight, and my listeners are going to learn a lot tonight too. You know what I mean?
Well,
So,
they can get in touch with me if they're anybody's interested in learning anything, any music, right?
mhm.
Or they can get in touch with me at fscottmoyer.1 @gmail.com.
And I will post that under my
Yeah.
my reviews here tonight too.
Yeah, yeah, that I welcome any newcomers because it's fun to teach.
That's that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Gotta thank Scott again for coming on. Guys, like I said, dreams come true. As you can see, the gentleman right in front of me, his dreams are coming true, and he's got one of the most expensive cymbals I've ever heard of, with 140 unbelievable people on that. That we'll hopefully get to see on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or someone who buys it takes good care of it. I gotta say that right now.
Yeah, it's the most famous symbol in the world.
Yeah. So,
Actually,
we'll
yeah.
definitely end it on that note. And like I
Alrighty.
said, it's nothing but love, peace, and happiness, everyone. Good night to good. I can't even say it correctly. Good night, everybody, and have a good nice week.